Okay, well, thank you, and thank everybody for inviting me here today. And I'm going to start by saying I feel really good about being in a space with creatives for one particular reason, because in this space I feel like it's okay that I'm going to start with talking about the pain of my own process in trying to figure out what I was going to talk about today. It was astounding to me, absolutely astounding how hard it was to approach this particular topic, and for so many different reasons. But I just didn't know what was going on, and I was really, really stuck. Sorry, the pain of technology, too. Yeah.
Very interesting.
I can keep going without slides, but
Yep.
what do you want me to do? Okay. Yeah, I'll describe the brilliant imagery that is about to be there, because, and I will say, this is a benefit, because I'm standing here with paper because of the pain I had in figuring out what I was doing. I was still writing notes to myself this morning. I had to send Mark slides yesterday, and he said, "You have no notes in your slides." And I said, "Because I still haven't finished thinking about this topic." And it's a really interesting one, because part of it, I realized in having a conversation, Mark mentioned that I create games. I create games kind of specific to collaborative processing. And so collaborative games that can help us talk about what we're doing, how we get in stuck mindsets, frankly, and trying to break through with conflict resolution tools. So they might literally be taken into a mediation, some of these games. I was sharing with a colleague some thoughts about what she might do with a nonprofit board with a particular game and how she might do it, how she might debrief it. And I started naming all of the things I was experiencing. I was trying to get it right. I was obsessed with the idea that there was this perfect nexus between pain, conflict resolution, and I had this lovely Venn diagram. This is what you're missing. And, oh, is it there? Okay, there we go. Yeah, and creativity. I know, yes, thank you. We know the performers know what's needed. Yeah. But I got myself completely obsessed with first of all, I got myself obsessed with what you call it, that little space where they all connect. And my partner tells me that, the scientific term, the mathematical term is the middle. But I don't know. Anyway, I got obsessed with what's the middle, how do these things connect, what is that I need to talk about. But I got into this mindset of it would be losing to give up trying for that and think about something else. I was focused on, no, I can't go to pain. I can't talk about the obvious connections between pain and conflict resolution. I need to bring it all together. And it got me really, really stuck. And then I kind of had that moment, first of all, of thinking, I'm doing what I teach people not to do. I've spent 30 years of my life trying to find the way to break through that mindset and support people in breaking through that mindset. And I'm not even recognizing I'm in it, which is problematic. And I had this realization that what was doing it to me was this word, that's what it was. Because public speaking is something I do a lot of. It isn't a place where I get particularly stuck. And the last time I did was 10 years ago when I had to do my dad's eulogy. And I was in the same mindset. It had to be perfect. I had to get it exactly right. It had to be really, really meaningful and powerful for everybody in the room in ways that you can't possibly aim for. So I'd set really unrealistic goals, and I'd become completely obsessed with meeting those goals, and nothing else was doing it. And that realization actually was a great release for me, because it suddenly allowed me to start thinking about, well, maybe I talk about how you break through that. Maybe I just talk about where are those intersections between these things. And I started thinking about it from a conflict resolution perspective, resolving my own conflict. And if I were doing it as a conflict resolution professional, I would be looking at how do I interrupt the pattern of thinking? How do I interrupt and change the way that I'm looking at that? How do I reframe this is the language that we use most often and mean very literally. How do we put a literal different frame on what we're doing? And in this case, what that meant for me was I started thinking about it as this isn't a puzzle I need to solve with an absolute right answer. The question really is, what are the possibilities of combinations? And so I hope that you will welcome me to talk about little bits and pieces that are connections amongst these. And where I've focused my attention is around that idea of pattern interrupt and how each of these things touch on interrupting patterns and the importance of them and the ways that they add to our thinking. So I'm going to start with pain. And pain is, like Mark's in his introduction basically said, pain is an interruption in pattern. He was talking about the ways in which it might lead to growth, the ways in which it's a signal that there is something wrong, the ways in which we need to, it can be an identifier of change. It can also be, and I really appreciate Cassidy appearing before, and particularly the song you ended on, the song that was about being stuck in a pattern of pain. It also is one of those patterns that we try to break. So it's both things. From the conflict resolution perspective, and that's the lens I am bringing as somebody who works in that field in particular, we see it in so many different ways. Pain is that signal in an interpersonal relationship. It's usually the trigger that causes people to reach out and try to find ways to break up patterns of communication, stagnation in relationships, ways in which people are angry with each other, are unable to listen to each other, all of those kinds of things in the interpersonal. It's also true, though, in the larger spaces, in the teams, in workplaces, when we get into the larger groups. It's often those pain points that lead us to recognize that there's something that we do need to change. And if the pain keeps increasing, we finally recognize that we do need to do something about it. So it causes those interruptions. It causes us to recognize the need for interruptions. And similarly, systems. More broadly, our systems can be so stagnant, can be so stuck. And it is usually those points of pain that drive it. We can think about the numbers of times that we've had truly, truly significant and profound change across a society. It has almost always been in response to the pain that at least some segment of society was feeling, and the recognition of it and the need for change. So I'm going to say that I agree with much of what Mark was saying. It can be that kind of symptom that we need to interrupt, and it is itself an interruption to patterns. So you can't talk about pain and systems interruptions, pattern interruptions in 2023 without talking about the massive pattern interruption that we've all just been going through. It has profoundly impacted everybody, and it has been a profound pain impact on a really significant number of the population. Not everybody. Some people found that it was a pattern interrupt that led to them being able to find better and more positive ways of engaging in work. Suddenly, they were able to appear online, and it changed their lives for better. And it has made changes. And we do see that in many different circumstances. But for so many more, what it was a move into different kinds of awareness. We recognized patterns of mental health challenges, and we started talking about them in ways that we hadn't. So it was a pattern change that did that. In the conflict resolution world, it has really significantly changed our practice in a couple of really, really huge ways. It has made it almost impossible to enter into the work of a mediator or a conflict resolution professional in any kind of context. And I mean that even as a legal professional, as a lawyer. It's almost impossible to enter into that world without a recognition that we need to be trauma-informed. Things that we ignored. We absolutely did not think that was part of our work, and we would say, oh no, I'm sticking to this one little bit. That's not relevant. All those feelings aren't relevant. The part that I need to work on is this one piece. But we've recognized that we need to change the way we approach things in order to be responsive to trauma, and not because we think, oh, if I'm in family law and I happen to have a client where I'm aware of domestic violence, I need to be conscious of that, and so I need to be trauma informed. But I don't do that work. I'm working in a commercial field. I'm working in a different area. We've learned through the last several years that it impacts everybody, that it could be everywhere, and that everything about the way we conduct our work should change and should acknowledge that anybody and potentially everybody who comes into our spaces may have some trauma responses and may be supported by kinder, better, and more appropriate processes. So we see that. We see that in terms of destigmatizing questions around mental health and concerns around mental health. We see it in a variety of different kinds of things. And so it is, to me, a situation where we also have seen pattern interrupts and pattern changes in the ways people engage in conflict. And for those of you who don't work in the conflict field, you probably still all feel like everybody is way, way more angry all the time, that conversations explode much faster, and you're not imagining it. The research that is happening in the field that I work in is showing that people are measurably more conflict avoidant now, that they enter into conflicts later. They sit on them for longer. They fester to the point where we are genuinely engaging in conflict later in the process, and as a consequence, we are seeing explosive engagement. People are coming in so much angrier because they've waited until it has reached a totally different point than it used to be. There's quite a lot of work being done looking at what does this look like, how is it impacting us, and yeah, it is. All those things you feel like are changing, they're changing, and it matters. I'm going to shift over to conflict resolution as a topic, and I'm going to hit this one a little bit lightly because I've been talking about others, and I want to make sure that I'm sticking to a short time, but I'm happy to talk more about it. But I have for a long time thought of the role of a conflict resolution professional as essentially being a pattern interruption person. It is literally interrupting a pattern of problematic communication to invite another person into the room. The second that you add a body to a room, you change the dynamic, you change the way the conversation flows. It might continue to go across the table between two people, but it's pretty easy to just sit somewhere else at the table and call that, get people to turn. Even just turning, changing who you're talking to, changes the way you talk, changes the way you communicate. Sometimes just sitting in a room is what it is. But all of the tools we learn, all of the training we do, and there's always lots of folks in a house who've taken things like active listening training or reflective listening training. All of those kinds of things, they are about breaking patterns in conversation. They're about stepping in and interrupting a problematic conversation that isn't working. And so I think of pretty much everything we do as falling into that particular category. I've got a few things up there, but there's so many. And then I'm going to talk just briefly about creativity. And I know that I'm in a room where folks will have lots that they can say about creativity and how creativity ties into pattern interrupts as well. But for me, in a conflict space, one of the things that is the most interesting way to think about those pattern interruptions is as a jolt, as something that just is, what can we bring into a space that is creative, that is going to surprise people, that is going to change the pattern of conversation? And I'll give you a slide of a few things that I literally do in mediations. And it is about trying to bring in just a real shift in what we do. Inviting people to look at music is one of them, absolutely. You see card games, you see apps that you bring in. Every time you change the nature of what you're doing and you come in and go, let's try something new, let's break the pattern, let's explicitly do that, you create this opportunity for a changed pattern of both communication and a changed mood, frankly. When I started shifting mood around what I was going to do today, everything felt more fun. When you shift mood, in terms of conflict, when you shift mood in terms of pain, you're in a better place to be able to address it and understand it. And I am going to just simply put up my super inspirational slide about, about this intersection. And what I'm hoping that we'll talk about, and I know that you're going to go into groups and have some conversations, I would love to hear your thoughts around where these intersect, where there are benefits to be found in the intersections and the spaces amongst these different things. Pattern interruption is the one that really occurred to me, and as I said, I think it's because of where I started with the challenge in needing to break my own process. But I really do think that the possibilities are endless to think about pain in relation to each of these other spaces. And I invite you to do that. And I'm done. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Sharon. I have a question about conflict resolution. How do you deal with conflict resolution when you are personally affected and involved with the pain?
Yeah, so that's a really, really big question. And so I'm going to say up front that if anybody wants to have personal conversations about some topics, particularly about their own matters around conflict, I'm happy to chat, I'm happy to exchange information, and I'm happy to also help people identify specific resources, because there are a bunch of resources to connect people with conflict resolution professionals to have conversations that'll go deeper than what I can do today. Because you'll be able to talk very specifically about this is the conflict that I'm particularly in right now and how might I work with it. So definitely just get in touch with me for that, and you've got some information for me. But in terms of the biggest thing around when you're trying to deal with your own conflict is really about trying to create the space for you to do it as safely and positively as you can. So trying to not engage when you are too escalated yourself, when your feelings are too high. That can mean putting a pause on it. That can mean asking for space to have a conversation. It can mean planning, preparing to go into conversations when you know you've already got a conflict with somebody. And that can include, I want to say, that can include where do you have the meeting? Who is at the meeting? Are you bringing a support person? Are you meeting online or in person? Are you doing, so thinking about and preparing all of the space around you, what the topic is as much as possible, being clear about what the purpose is, and anticipating, and I know this is the one that often we gap on, anticipating that the other person may also have all kinds of needs around conflict, and being as generous as possible about trying to create space for them too. We often don't recognize how much challenge it is for the other person to come in. We're just like, well, they're the bully, so they absolutely will be fine coming into this space. And they may be a bully because of what's going on for them in terms of fear, in terms of reactions, in terms of that. Is there somebody, even if they're the bully, is there somebody they might bring with them who actually makes them behave in a different way because they are demonstrating how reasonable they are for the other person and therefore are not going to be in those spaces? So that's already a bit of a long answer, but I will say there are lots of different things you can do, and in each individual situation, there's a lot of thinking about what do I need to do to create that, to keep me in the best possible place to be able to engage in this positively and to be safe to get out of it when I need to.
Hi, I'm Ian. Thanks for being here today, Sharon. My question is about I hadn't thought about pattern interruption before as it relates to being a witness to somebody else's pain.
Right.
And as much as I want to be the one that steps in and becomes the pattern interruption for them, I see that as potentially a creative thing to do, but I also see it as kind of forceful. Do you know of anybody I can read about creative ways to be present with another person and be a gentle pattern interruption for them?
It's a great question, and there may be folks in the audience who have answers around reading on that specific topic. I certainly am conscious of resources that are around training people in conflict resolution and in trauma-informed practice that will be broad. It'll be broader than conflict resolution. That'll be about how one engages and how one enters. But when I'm hearing your question as being potentially more specific to how do I help a friend or how do I help somebody that I'm engaged with, and that's going to look quite different. So I think that there may be people in the room who have better access to resources that might be in that particular area. But I would say some of the kinds of things that you might want to look to are trauma-informed practice training in almost any area. We do much of the same learning about it, however we're going to utilize it. And that's about, again, it's about creating the safe space. It's about what do you do for yourself and what do you do for them. Because trying to insert yourself can be really not just, I'll say, I use the term pattern interrupt consciously throughout the talk, because a pattern interruption to me is relatively neutral. You're trying to break the pattern for somebody. But I often use the term disrupt too. But I think of that as being a much more intentional thing that comes with a judgment that something is wrong, and that you somehow have this ability to see what you can do for somebody else. And I was hearing in yours that you're concerned about stepping into that space of disrupting, judging, creating, and there is a real need to be invited into spaces very often, unless there's real risk and danger. And yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Does
But I
anybody
can
have
talk
a
to you about
suggestion of a
Yeah.
resource? Has anybody
Happy-
read anything that's extraordinary in this realm? No?
No.
I mean, we could just ask ChatGPT.
No,
right?
it's a good
You do?
question, because it's just so utterly specific, the way it was framed, yeah.
Hi, my name's Jeff. What I was thinking about while I was listening is the structure of pain. And the first thing that I always started with was the music. And if we paid attention, which we don't often do, we would have discovered those individuals, their names started with an A, a B, and a C. And I was like, why did they just show up and why are they an ABC? And I was like, that's the ABC of pain. And I was like, if we can understand the structure of pain, and then we'd be able to, explore what are the possibilities. And as a group, we separated into smaller groups. And within the smaller groups, we got to express ourselves with pain. But imagine if it was a big group talking about what are the possibilities. So we'd have collaboration, we'd have engagement, and just for everybody to be thinking about creatively what is a solution to pain. And I was just thinking that would be really cool for an opportunity.
Also, World Tour, Cassidy Warren, and the structure of pain.
It'd be awesome.
I see you. I want to go here.
Yeah, Rena Lazar, thanks for being here. I'd love to hear some examples, or one example, of how you've used creativity in a painful conflict resolution setting, and to be provocative, a personal one would be awesome.
Yeah, no, that's good and provocative, and made it so much harder to answer because, for exactly the reason you can imagine, because when I'm in my own personal pain and conflict space, I am exactly like everybody else. My brain is doing all the wrong things for creativity. I am so unlikely to do anything. So the only spaces where I could say that I have genuinely done that in those kinds of spaces is when I have stepped away and not done it in the moment, because I am just as bad as anybody else in the moment. Maybe I recognize faster that I'm going down a really bad path, maybe, but I told you this morning I didn't recognize I was going down a bad path in my planning either, so not always. But stepping away and inviting people that I'm having trouble with to play games is one of the things that I do. And that can be at, I don't want to be too specific about places I've done it because they might be identifiable. But in terms of inviting colleagues who are working on a particular project together to sit down and play. before we do something, putting things in workplaces in the lunchroom and actually going in and playing games. What I've found is that if you play pretty simple collaborative games, then people can get really into it, and it's the first time for many that they are trying to actually jointly win something, and it's the first time they experience that, what that team thing is like. So I have found it really successful. You don't even have to talk about it if you let it just be something, but you can talk about it too. And I will give just a funny example of how hard it is. I have done it with a room full of lawyers, very, very specifically, given them a card game, and we had one lawyer who 45 minutes into this card game that was iterative, that was like running 5-minute cycles. We had played it like 9, 10 times at this point. He still kept killing everybody because he kept insisting that he was winning. We'd all die, but he was winning because he played the last card and killed everybody. And that was how he was framing it as a win. But it gives you a space to have a different kind of conversation.
Where do we find these collaborative games? Or is there any others?
I have some lists of collaborative games online. I can, send me a note if you don't spot them immediately.
Can you
but, yeah.
send that to me and I'll make sure that gets.
I can send that to you.
Yeah, we'll send it to everybody. That'll be great.
Yeah.
Cool. I saw some hands over here as well. Where were they? Okay, Gabe.
Thank you very much for your talk. My question is more around creativity and the space of, struggling to be creative, that pain that we feel with that. Mm-hmm. And obviously in the space of social media, it's quite easily, tempting to just pull out your phone and start the doom scrolling. So what are your favorite pattern interrupts when you are struggling and feeling that pain of creativity?
I am really, really motivated by doing new things. And I have actually 3 different years, not successively, I've always taken a break between, but 3 different years relatively recently, I have set myself a target of doing 1 new thing a week and recording it. And so 3 years of that has been really fascinating. And so what I tend to do is, if I'm really in that struggle space, I tend to make it one of those, I need to do something completely different and new that I have never done before. And I gotta say, I think it would have been really easy to do that challenge when I was younger. It gets harder every year to find something new, and the more often you do it, it gets harder. And sometimes I play it with my daughters, who are in their 20s, and we'll be challenging each other to find new things. And it just seems like I should have done this earlier because, man, it's so easy for them. But the challenge of finding something new breaks up mine. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, Shiraz gets the last question.
Hi, thank you for sharing your knowledge. I'm Shiraz. I'll be 75 on Sunday. Yeah.
Happy birthday.
So my question is, what age group is the most painful one? Because from my own experience, because the most painful periods are at birth, when you come out and then start crying, and then you need some food that's conflict resolution. But
Well, it's problem solving anyway.
and the second age group I found was between 20 and 30, because you are getting out of your parents and starting a career. And the third stage I found was very painful, was going from 65 to 75. So from Sunday onwards, I'll be fine.
It's suddenly going to improve.
So can you, and the creativity part as well.
And the which part, sorry?
What is the best age group for even creativity?
For creativity.
Oh, man. I'm not even going to pretend that's my area of expertise. So I will answer only in a very different way. I'm gonna say what I find really fascinating in the age range piece and from my space in conflict resolution is the differences in the ways people engage and the challenges that we have in communicating across those ages when we've got, it should be simple, right? Like it really should be so simple to be able to talk cross-generation about different things. We should have similar processes. and we don't. And I would say that we all experience pain at all of those ages, and it can be really, really profound, and it can be, I think, an interesting area of pain that I do find fascinating to think about and look into is that pain of trying to communicate across different experience, and generation is one of those spaces where we just have different experience. I think we're going to find just even more radical differences in the next few years as we're starting to see people who lived through COVID in high school versus people who lived through it when they were older and established and already set up in a home office and all of the rest of that. Our experiences were so dramatically different, and our pain from it was so different, and the ways in which we now are communicating about it are even more different. So I don't have an answer to what's the most painful, and I think it'll be really situational, but it's interesting to try and think about age and pain as well. Yeah, the way we communicate.
I was recently pulled into an interesting situation where a reporter had heard rumors, had been told by some people working in film and television and the creative professions about numerous middle-aged, white, predominantly white men, able-bodied men, who were missing or had committed suicide, just in Metro Vancouver, like a lot of them. And nobody was talking about it. But like IATSE during the strike recently stopped publishing death notices because it was overwhelming.
Wow.
Yeah, they didn't want the actors and everybody in the union to realize that almost entirely white men were jumping off of bridges.
Wow.
Because they were not talking about it, they were not processing, they were not seeking help, and there was that stigma, and those of you men in the audience, you know what I'm talking about. It's a shameful thing that we've been taught to talk about mental health, to admit that we're flawed, to say, I'm in pain, I need help. Sergio, help me, I need to talk to you. So I encourage everybody here, I don't care what your gender is, if you're in pain, creativity may not be the solution, but one creative act could literally be to boldly find someone and just talk to them about it. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Sharon Sutherland.
Oh, thank you. That was great.